I looked on the deck to see if there were people, and there were none. I looked for life rafts, and at least the ones on the side I could see were all there. Even though the radio antenna wasn't rotating, I decided to set my radio's second channel to listen to the International Maritime Hailing and Distress frequency anyway, just in case. Of course, it didn't pick anything up, but I was on the water now, so I may as well have that channel plugged in. When I had originally set off from the beach, the water was completely flat and calm. That's always how the water was in the harbor, and that was completely the point of the sheltered sound. There was a barrier of rocks that made the giant artificial reef that kept the waves down to absolutely nothing. That is what made this place such a popular destination for everybody local. Everyone from warmer climates thought we were all ridiculous, but oh well. I was passing the breaker now, and was maybe a quarter-mile out from proper land. Immediately I was launched into real waves. They were to my left, angrily smashing into the rock border, and some of them were coming to me, testing to see me if I was worthy of coming out to the ocean. I guess if I had any last doubts, the breaker would have been my only realistic chance at turning around. I was passing the breaker now, and was maybe a quarter-mile out from proper land. Immediately I was... excuse me. I couldn't actually use the rocks for safety, of course. It would take years to climb back to the shore on the rocks, and a wave would be able to knock me off by then. Or I'd slip, or the barnacles would get me. I didn't have the right kind of gloves or shoes. I took a second to scan back and followed the breaker back to land, and it seemed like it stretched for miles. I'd never seen it from this side before. I'd only ever been out on the Sound before, and on lakes, never on real waves on a boat this small. Anything larger, and I'd always been on the big ferries. I tried to angle my Zodiac into the waves. This was definitely causing me a bit of anxiety, like all the other things I've been doing, though. I just sort of accepted it. I didn't like this by any means, but what I did like was overcoming obstacles. This was definitely something I could check off my bucket list. Before this, there was no way to really try any of these things. Nobody ever wanted to, always other priorities. They weren't bad things, just there was just no way to do absolutely everything. My mind bumped back to the current situation. The waves were maybe 3 to 4 inches high, which was enough to where the spray was getting into my raft. Literally, if the waves were any higher, I would be in trouble. Thankfully, it was a calm day and not windy. It was the summer here, and this was about all the worst it got until there was a storm. I honestly couldn't tell if I was getting any closer to the yacht. It looked a little closer as I rocked over each wave and the salty water sprayed around. I'd maybe been on my way for 20 minutes now or something. I got out my binoculars and looked, and still didn't see anything different on the ship. But the ship looked closer in the binoculars. I guess that meant I was closer. I stopped looking at the ship through the binoculars, though, because it was too bumpy, and decided to just bunk through the waves. It had been maybe 5 minutes since I'd passed by the artificial reef, which was a quarter mile, so maybe the ship was a mile out or a little less. I probably had another half hour. Started to get the bonks and air splashes while I waited for a thought to pop into my head. First, I thought about the last luxury mega yacht I had been on. It was one of this ship's sister ships, or brother ships, when I was a kid. It would tour the Sound, and I think my school booked it so we could celebrate completing our school year or something to that effect. We would come down to the city fairly frequently to either visit the zoo or the aquarium, since it wasn't too far of a drive, and then one time, to our surprise, the event coordinators had booked one of the yachts. As I bonked from wave to wave, I recall the ship having room for a few vehicles in the hulls and an arcade and a dining hall. That's about all I remember, and that had been a long time ago. I think the dining hall had a bar, dance floor, and some poles and a DJ table and stuff, though I was far too young for some of that to really register. I assumed the ship would be similar, but maybe more feminine. I don't really remember a lot about it, but as I grew older, I had a really I had really distanced myself from the city and moved further south. That move had drawn me away from this part of the Pacific and closer to some of the larger rivers, which had different large recreational ships. There was a dinner cruise, one with a giant wheel, and a speedboat fleet that was extremely fun, and a dinner yacht that I'd never been on. They were all river-based, though, and I had really missed the ocean. That's all I really could remember, and bumped past the waves and the spray as the sun kept moving overhead, and I thought more about the fuel slowly burning in the Zodiac's respectable engine and how screwed I would be if the engine would suddenly die. I looked down and there were no oars or anything. There was some rope, which was good. I would need that for sure because I realized I had no idea how I was going to dock with the ship at all. This is going to be great, I sarcastically thought. However, I remained optimistic. And with pushing my thoughts out of my head for now, I kept trying to keep my beefy raft angled with the waves, but still angled to where the big cruise yacht was. The luxury yacht kept slowly getting bigger. I continued counting the waves and salty spray splashes and eventually caught close to where I could start to see the details of the vessel. It was maybe 100 sprays since I started counting, and the ship was getting to be a pretty big size. I got nervous with anticipation building and counted another 50 salty splashes. I was able to coax the anxious feelings aside because nothing indeed was happening on the ship. I rationalized it to myself that there was going to be nobody on the ship and that everything was going to be fine. Every time I squashed that, though, a little peep inside of me would say from the back, "How did it get here and then stay here?" Well, I assumed that the guys just didn't know the whole story, and that was my job. I considered zapping the Zodiac to take a break and scan it from afar. It'd be nice to have something to eat and take a longer look at the vessel. As I putted along, I realized I might not have enough fuel to make it back if for some reason I changed my mind. I had no idea. I always overthought things. I decided the best thing to do was to head towards the stern and then rotate around the ship clockwise to find the docking area. I counted another 25 or so waves and got close enough to where I could specifically angle towards the stern of the ship, so I did. Everything looked fine as I headed around, structurally in terms of the hull being free of damage. I did notice that there started to be some rust stains, though, when the waves would be low. I looked up at the stern and saw Anastasia proudly written, and it made me smile. "I finally found you, Anastasia," I said to myself. I started my clockwise circle around the port side after glancing at the rear of the ship, never really having stopped. The maneuver was more of a sort of carefully spinning the craft in a circle as the ship had been protecting me from the ocean's wake. I kept inspecting the hull for damage and saw none, but kept seeing more rust. All of the rivets had begun to have rust around. I did a rough and uneducated estimate that the ship must have been out in the ocean without any care for at least the last 9 months or so without any love. I kept performing my inspection as best as I could and kept seeing more and more rust, with rust running down. It was very sad to see the ship in this state, and I know it needed to be taken into the harbor and cleaned up. I realized, though, that there was no way to dock the ship here without us being an instant target. The other side still had a navy of sorts, and it was only getting larger. I tried not to think about that, though, because it didn't make any sense for the vessel to be sitting here unmolested then. Why hadn't they come aboard and absorbed the ship into their navy? I guess because it was haunted. Ooh, so spooky. Maybe the original passengers had thought they could simply live out here and ride it out of the collapse or something. But it had been a while. I suspected something else was going on. Something I hadn't thought of. Had the other zone guys provided any other clues? No, I guess not. Only that the ship was haunted, and it is planted here now with no movement. I guess I was going to find out. I looped around the bow and looked up. This is where the ship took on a more feminine shape with 2 curvy paths that extended out in front of the ship on an upper deck. They were sort of like pincers on a crab, I mused. I imagined people being able to walk out to look down into the water as the ship motored along. It must have been amazing.